Carmen Curick, who will be monitoring the chat this afternoon, and Taylor Snow, our English and History middle school. Well, today he's acting as a middle school specialist, but he's all things English and history, and he will be supporting this work this afternoon. So I will turn it over to him. But our hope is that you leave this afternoon with some ideas to bring back to your buildings and divisions. And please know that we will be recording these and posting them on our website for use in the future. So without further ado, here's Taylor.
All right, again, thanks for joining us today, everybody. We'll just go ahead and dive right in and get to the meat of what it is that we're going to be discussing today. Slides to advance, there we go. So first of all, we're going to look at all of this through the framework of the Balanced Assessment Plan guidelines that our assessment office has put out, corresponding with the legislation in 2014 to eliminate those 5 SOL tests, obviously throughout elementary and middle school, but largely concentrated in middle school with an outsized impact in history specifically. Then we'll talk about really kind of get into what it means for writing to be authentic, both within content areas and in generally speaking. We will next move on to building paired passages around history and how that can be the best stimulus for some authentic history writing. And then finally, I'll be sharing some resources, all free, some of them given by or provided by state agencies to help drive this kind of work that you can share both in your classrooms if you're a teacher or with your teachers throughout your division if you're joining us as a specialist or central office staff today. So as I said, first let's start talking, going over some ideas that are there in those the guidelines surrounding balanced assessment plans and local alternative assessments. So again, if you'll recall, if you were in education, particularly in middle school history in 2014, a series of tests that included U.S. History 1 and U.S. History 2, along with third grade history, fifth grade writing, and third grade science went away. And the mandate was that while those SOL tests went away, alternative assessments were required to demonstrate that the skills and content were still being covered. Those alternative assessments were developed locally, and the hope with that was that that local development would prompt innovation and discussions within school divisions about what skills, what content we really want to make sure our students are leaving our classes in possession of. In terms of documentation, the request was that those alternative assessments be documented in a balanced assessment plan for each of the courses where those tests were going away. Part of that, those guidelines included some very clear guidance around what a balanced assessment system includes. And the point of all of that, I think it's really important to understand, is emphasizing the balance in that assessment system. It's a combination of assessments that form a comprehensive measure of student learning. In a world where we're only using multiple choice tests to assess student learning, we are learning a lot about one very specific skill that student may possess, and a lot about what they know about the content that's being asked about. The question then is, do we really know what the student can really do? Do we have a full picture of what that student is capable of doing? So making sure that our assessment system includes a variety of assessment that not only matches to the content being assessed, but also making sure it's instilling the skills that we want students to leave our class possessing. When I think about balanced assessment, if you'll forgive me a quick sports analogy, I'm going to use one. think about if an athlete showed up to the NFL scouting combine to kind of try out for teams, and the teams only timed them in the 40-yard dash and sent them home. You would be getting very specific information about that player's ability to run 40 yards really quickly. But would you really be getting a full picture of all of the things that athlete would be capable of, so that you can make a judgment as to whether there's somebody you want to draft for your team? It's intuitive that's not how we would do it. We're thinking about sports. I think we need to get to a point where it's intuitive in our classrooms, that we want to make sure we're assessing students on all of the skills and all of the content we think that they need to leave our classes in possession of. So some other ideas around balanced assessment systems and best practices for those. We do want to make sure that in addition to measuring student achievement and growth based on the standards, we're also thinking about those 5 C's for Virginia graduates. There's critical thinking, creative thinking, collaboration, communication, citizenship skills, all skills that you can't get at if you're only using one kind of assessment over and over and over again. That's where the balance comes in here. So some guidelines that were released surrounding those local alternative assessments and balanced assessment plans. And again, this is pretty wide open. The point was to allow divisions to innovate and really come up with a plan that was going to fit their specific needs and allow them to assess their students in a way that was meaningful to them. But school divisions are expected to continue to use the Virginia Quality Criteria tool to develop the tasks that are being used that form these local alternative assessments, and school divisions are encouraged to continue using the common rubrics developed by VDOE that exist for all of those replaced SOL tests. And all of those documents obviously can be found on our DOE website. A few more guidelines. Again, school divisions are expected to prepare balanced assessment plans for each of the 5 replaced SOL assessments. Some of your divisions may have even been asked to submit those for review. And again, the exact nature of the system was left pretty open, because again, part of what makes these balanced assessment plans important and valuable is not just having the plan, but reflecting on the way you're using assessment across your division or across your school as you develop those plans. The development process, as is the case with a lot of what we do, is just as important as the final outcome because of the lessons you learn along the way. These balanced assessment plans are asked to indicate the types of assessments used to measure the content and skills. And then there is guidelines surrounding the fact that they may include a variety of assessment types, but they must include some performance assessments. So we are going to be spending a lot of our time today talking about writing and sort of skewing toward that performance assessment perspective. And then finally, and what I think is really the driving force behind what we're doing today, and I've gotten a message that my PowerPoint has stopped working, so if you'll bear with me for just a second, I'll be right with you. It seems to always pop up. But as I was saying, I think that the framework around which a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is derived comes from guidelines from Superintendent's Memo 25-19 Attachment A, where it's noted that the guidelines permit and encourage integrated assessments that include multiple subject areas. For example, a local assessment might address content from both U.S. History 1 and 6th grade English. So this is a perfect way to make sure that this process in your divisions is not just one more thing. This is a case where with collaboration and with the development of the right kind of assessments, you can truly capture the essence of working smarter and not harder. And particularly for history and English, which is going to be the focus of what we're talking about today, the integration between those two subjects, if you're doing it right, is something that should come quite naturally. And I hope that by the end here, that point sort of comes through. So So I guess the question then becomes why? Why do things differently than we've done? If this is something that will be new to your teachers or to your classroom or to your division, well, what's the point of doing it this way? Well, there are several, and if we want to get to a very sort of specific testing sort of impetus, we have noticed that the elimination of the grade 5 writing SOL assessment has likely resulted in less direct writing or research instruction, which may be one cause of declining 8th grade scores. And that is something that in your classroom or in your division, anecdotally or quantitatively, you might have seen that as well. So the question then becomes, if we have that gap and there are students sitting in your 6th grade class who you do not feel have received as much writing instruction as they need to get to the point where as 8th graders they're able to pass that 8th grade writing SOL, or or to a point where they can write to successfully demonstrate knowledge in your class, the question becomes, how do we close that gap? How do we make up for that lost time? We see, again, speaking quantitatively, we see that over the last 3 years, we have seen a drop of 3 points on that 8th grade writing test. You'll see going from a pass rate of 73 to 70 in 2018-2019. We do see a 3-point decline in end of course writing as well, but that's hard to sort of compare apples and oranges on because of the implementation of the local verified credit plan for writing that some divisions have opted to use. But again, focusing on that 8th grade writing result, the scores have trended down since 2017-2018, down 3 points to 2018-2019. We see similar declines in reading. Again, the focus of what we're talking about today is writing, but you're also going to find the focus is good writing instruction cannot exist without good reading instruction. I mean, those things are tied to one another. And if they're not linked, we're not looking at best practice. So without belaboring these scores, you can see there are some positive trends there where you can track cohorts over time and see some improvement. But in general, scores have declined in reading as well. So thinking a little bit about what are some reading best practices that you can take back to both your classroom, to your divisions, thinking specifically if you're sharing this message about we're going to read more, we're going to write more in our history classes, if you're sharing that message with a group of history teachers, things that you might focus on surrounding reading include the fact that all research indicates that students need to be reading daily. They need to be reading extended pieces of text. They need to be reading on grade level. That doesn't mean that we should hand students a text that is above their level and say good luck and just wish them on their way. Obviously, there are students who will require supports and scaffolding to access that grade level material, but we also know that if students are not exposed to grade level material, they don't make up the gaps that exist. They'll never get to grade level, so it's important that students are reading on grade level material, again, with the proper supports and scaffolds to allow them to access it. We also know that students need to read daily, and this includes nonfiction and fiction, a variety of pieces. Schools should provide students with opportunities to read and compare paired passages. We're going to talk a lot about paired passages today, but because of the opportunities for critical analysis that paired passages give students. And that's really where you open up opportunities for instruction around the 5 C's. And it's where you open up opportunities for students to be thinking like a historian and writing like a historian. And that is what, when we're talking about authentic writing practice in history classes, that really is what we're talking about. So what role should writing be playing, and why should writing be playing a role at all in your history classrooms across all content areas? Well, for one, if you think about each of these 5 C's, citizenship, creative thinking, communication, collaboration, and critical thinking, an inextricable part of each of those skills is effective writing, writing for multiple audiences, whether that audience be an editorial board at a newspaper or a boss or a client or somebody that you're on a team with, or his college history professor. We know that there are lots of different audiences that we have to write for, and both in our jobs that we're in now and jobs that we may have had in the past, from all the way down to the summer jobs you may have had when you were in college or over when you were in high school. We need to be able to write for different audiences, and in doing so, access these 5 C's. So what do we know about good writing instruction? We know that the best writing instruction is integrated with reading, not divorced from it. Thinking about teaching writing as a skill that is wholly separate from reading is not best practice, and it's also likely to be far less engaging when being executed in the classroom. If you're using writing as a replacement for multiple choice assessment, that's still good. It's important that students are writing daily for lots of different purposes, but I would consider that when writing like fill in the blanks or short answers is there merely to replace multiple choice, you may be missing opportunities for students to be thinking critically, for students to be thinking creatively, and it's not going to be the most authentic version of writing. And it's the type of writing that oftentimes you can just assign students. You can say, I want you to write this answer. I want you to respond to this prompt that's separate from anything else that we've been doing. And again, while it's important that that's writing and that's good, how often do we do that kind of writing in any sort of real world context or any sort of academic context? I would argue not often. So if we're talking about taking classroom writing to the next level, it's important to have it integrated with reading so that you can generate these more analytical responses. Doing so will allow you to integrate all the English SOL strands. So if you think about writing authentically in response to reading, that is allowing you to both communicate, it's asking you to research, it's asking you to read, and it's asking you to write. So really, you're killing like 4 birds with 1 stone by having writing based on information that students are reading. This also simply increases the amount of time students spend doing both. All the research that we have points to the fact that you don't really hit a point of diminishing returns for reading and writing time in an instructional day until you get beyond 150 minutes per day. So if students spend their entire history class reading and writing, they're going to be reaping the benefits of each of those minutes. So it's important to understand that. And finally, writing in this way is a transferable skill. It's not something whose impact is going to be limited to 1 assessment in 1 class on 1 day. Learning how to write and respond in response to something you've read is something that will improve literacy across all content areas. The issue with this is that this is the type of writing that must be taught. It must be modeled for students. It does require classroom instructional time to get students to the point where they are writing this way or writing in ways that are important and authentic for your content area. And it's important to note that effective writing instruction means writing is embedded across all contents as a content-specific set of skills. And not only thinking about the type of writing you do for your job, think about what it means to write specifically for your content area. That may be thinking about writing like a historian when it comes to analyzing documents and assessing bias and using evidence that's sort of scattered across time to make an argument related to history. It could mean using lab data and assessing what that means, like as a scientist would, or it could mean writing as a mathematician may write. It is going to vary the type of writing by content area. But it's important to think about how student writing can be generated as a response to the kind of information and text that students are going to encounter in your content area. If you know they're going to be encountering primary source documents and political cartoons, teaching students specifically how they can write to analyze that kind of content is really important. just as it is in a science class to teach students how to write up and report laboratory data. That's not a skill that's intrinsic. It's something that has to be developed and modeled in your students. But it's worth it because, again, it's an authentic skill that can be transferable across lots of different disciplines. And that is something that is reflected in both the history and social science essential understandings, where you see students are being asked to use all of these skills. And if for some reason or another you have not looked at the 2015 history SOLs, obviously we hope that those are the ones that you're using, but you'll notice the first 20 pages of each of those documents is composed of very specific guidance around teaching specific history and social science skills. And you see those here, and you'll also see that all of these can be accessed, can be demonstrated, can be practiced through writing. And obviously this is supported across the English essential understandings as well. Thinking about the idea that students should communicate ideas for a variety of purposes is something that we've been talking about a lot so far today. Something that we haven't touched on yet, but is also important when you think about modeling good writing for your students, modeling the idea that good writers plan and they write and they go back and they revise, they get feedback from others. Writing is not and should not have to be a finished product the minute pen goes to paper or hands go to keyboard. It's something that is a recursive process that involves planning, drafting, revising, and editing. So that's an important thing to model as you think about teaching writing specifically in a history class. It's something that we know that good English teachers are doing naturally. It's something that especially history teachers that haven't done a lot with writing before may need some guidance around. And if you have not seen our skills progression charts in history and social science and in English, what you see here with these screen grabs is that the types of skills that we're talking about when we talk about writing across content areas, those skills are introduced at the same time. So if you look down at the bottom on the orange chart, in English, students are asked to give fact-based support for opinions. They're asked to be introduced to that throughout 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And in social science, they're asked to question and use critical thinking skills to summarize points and evidence to answer a question in 3rd grade. And this is not an accident. This is something that is designed very intentionally to support the kind of interdisciplinary work and vertical and horizontal planning that we're talking about today. And again, I've touched on this a little already. It is really important to understand the difference between assigning writing versus teaching writing. It's very easy to assign writing. You say, here's the prompt, write it. But as we know, that's the kind of writing assignment that in many contexts is going to be doomed to fail because there is no guidance around the writing process, but there also isn't a great deal of engagement or authenticity surrounding an assignment like that. Where there is a lot more engagement and authenticity is around writing that is taught. Asking students to research and read to figure out their own path in regards to a writing assignment. Having teachers use time in class to teach specific writing skills and strategies so that students don't feel lost the minute a writing assignment is given to them. And finally, asking students to use models and strategies to complete assignments and adjust based on feedback both from their teachers and from their peers. So when writing is taught, we see teachers modeling this process. And I think, especially for a teacher who's not used to teaching writing, this is the easiest way to begin with their students. It can feel intimidating, particularly if, as a writer, you as a teacher, it's the kind of thing you've just sort of always known to do, and you don't really remember how writing was taught to you. An easy first step is just having teachers model the writing process. writing with their students and allowing their students to see them going through writing as this recursive process, puzzling over the right word, going back, thinking aloud, revising, and then editing only after they've gone back to sort of revise their thoughts and make sure they have things that are down that are coherent and supported by evidence. Just allowing students to see you model that process can go a long way in teaching writing, which is something, again, that we've been speaking about over the last couple slides. So, again, this is something that in English, this might be fairly common knowledge, but for a history teacher, they may not know exactly when different modes of writing are being introduced to students and how they're being introduced. They might not have any sense that there's much writing going on at the kindergarten and first grade level, for example, but there certainly is. That is spelled out in the standards. As early as kindergarten, students are engaged in narrative and descriptive writing processes, and that only builds throughout the course of elementary school, so that by 5th grade, before they come to middle school, that they will have been exposed to narrative, descriptive, expository, and persuasive writing modes. So that when they get to middle school and in 6th grade, they can focus on narrative and reflective writing in a lot more detail than they would have been in elementary school. And then throughout 7th and 8th grade, they can focus on expository and persuasive writing. And then obviously moving on into high school, thinking about your vertical planning and ensuring that when students leave 8th grade, they are ready to work and to write on a high school level. Students again tackle the persuasive style, but then are introduced to the analytical writing style. Something that if you're writing in your history classes throughout middle school, that's something that they will be introduced to and will understand pretty intuitively. If you think about primary source analysis, that is analytical writing. And so if you're asking your students to do that throughout middle school, they're going to be very prepared for when that new mode is introduced in 9th and 10th grade. And then we'll be set up for even more success as they move into 11th and 12th grade with the persuasive and argumentative writing styles. So I've mentioned authentic writing a few times. Just want to go over some examples of really what that means. And I think if you're writing to analyze sources in history, that's an easy way to get an authentic writing right away. But just some larger rules as to what we mean when we talk about authentic writing and some ideas surrounding that. First, just using mentor texts and engaging sources to provide authentic stimuli for writing. Giving students something to write about that they're going to be engaged in, and making sure that that's something they're writing about is something that they will think about critically and creatively. Because again, we're ensuring that they are acquiring these reading skills alongside these writing skills. So when you're thinking about building this sort of authentic writing in a middle school classroom, consider documents that encourage students to write to demonstrate their historical thinking skills. I think the classic of these is gathering documents surrounding the Boston Massacre and ascertaining from those very competing viewpoints exactly what it is you think may have happened in Boston on that day, and not only saying this is what I think, but being able to point to those sources to say this is why I think that. That's an important next step. But there are documents that exist of that sort across all historical eras, and I think as a teacher, especially as a teacher who likes history, it can be fun to sort of dig for those document sets. And then considering the idea of incorporating daily writing, whether that be warm-ups prior to beginning a unit of study, or if you have some sort of current event piece that happens at the beginning of every class, or so on a weekly basis, not just asking students to passively sit and watch something about current events or read something and then not do anything with it. Adding a writing piece to the way you incorporate current events into your history class can be a really easy way to incorporate daily writing. And then thinking about consolidating all their thoughts or all their findings after some independent reading or class discussion. And then finally thinking about authentic writing as a way to drive summative assessment, because not only are you assessing their content knowledge, but you're also assessing their skill development. You're getting a much more full picture of what a student can and can't do. So I want to move on to a quick discussion of paired texts for authentic writing in the history classroom. Paired texts are being introduced on the 2017 Reading Standards of Learning Aligned tests. So this is something that if you're doing paired text work in your history classes, you are not only helping students think like historians, but you are helping your English language arts colleagues prepare their students for more standardized testing by giving them experience with the analysis of paired text. And if you can use your history class to effectively allow English teachers to double the amount of time their students are being exposed to paired text, then that is quite the gift to your colleagues and is certainly a best practice. So in terms of research, what does research say about effective reading and about engagement with texts and about critical examination of texts? We know that practicing critical thinking with text by asking students to recognize bias and determine the quality of sources can be a really great driver of the kinds of reading skills that we're talking about today. Using evidence from reading to support a point that you may have to make. Recognizing text structures and how the writer uses text structures to create purpose and to drive their meaning. Making inferences. These are all skills that we often think of as English skills, but if you think about the way you think about history and the way you think about documents, these are strategies that you use in your history class every day. You might just not be thinking about it as purposefully as an English teacher may be. So again, I'll point out too, it's also important when building this sort of work to know your students. So, if we're talking about the importance of building relationships, we know research indicates that this becomes especially vital in middle school. But we also, if you look at cognitive research, Daniel Willingham, a neuropsychologist at UVA, basically points to the fact that the more engaging the texts that you've selected are, the greater comprehension will be and the greater self-efficacy that will be promoted by those readings. Again, that's something that just sort of makes sense intuitively, but it is supported by research. And then finally, in terms of balancing the type of text that you're using in class, it is important, especially in a history class, but across all content areas, to select text that the entire class is reading, because that enables analysis and discussion in a way that 100% student choice may not. But we also know that the best way to engage students with the text is to let them choose that text. So there should be a balance, not just in English, but in history classes as well, so that students are exposed to a variety of different passages, but also they're exposed to reading that they enjoy. So again, going into a little more detail on paired texts, what can they include? It doesn't necessarily just have to be two passages next to one another. It can be, and that's still a very productive and engaging way to use paired text. But think about pulling in addition to nonfiction and articles and things of that sort, short stories and poems. In history, we're lucky because we have access to all these amazing infographics and maps and images and political cartoons and music that can be paired with a primary source document or a secondary source document, maybe a current event item, to form a really powerful thematic set of text. And again, in history class, but across the board, paired text can focus on a common theme or topic that fits history, or you can find paired texts that are specific in terms of the content that they're addressing, like the Boston Massacre example I gave earlier. And it's important to think about paired text as items that can be compared and contrasted so that students can demonstrate deeper understanding in those important historical thinking skills. And as I noted, Paired texts are included on the 2017 6th through 8th grade reading SOL tests, so doing them in your history class allows you to get a double dose for your students. So here's an example of a paired text set for U.S. history to 1865. On the left, you have a primary source from the Lewis and Clark exhibition, and you will be getting this presentation, and these links are live, so you can access this information that way. But you don't need to necessarily read over these now, but both accounts here suggest that Sacagawea was playing a vital and important and brave role in the Lewis and Clark expedition. So pairing those passages with this article excerpt from the Washington Post regarding the Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea statue in Charlottesville, as well as a picture of the statue, gives you the ingredients for some really great analysis that focuses both on history content, but also current events. So, asking students to read the primary source account, read the article, look at the statue, and assess, is this the most accurate portrayal of Sacagawea that could be made? And they're at this point they're researching, they're reading, they're writing, they're thinking critically, they're thinking creatively, because they might be thinking about how could you do this statue differently to more accurately fit what they've just read in the primary source documents. So it opens up a lot of possibilities, and it has students practicing a lot of English and history skills. Here are some writing ideas surrounding that specific paired text set. It could be very short. You can just have them analyzing the journal entries, and that could be it. And that's very valuable, especially if you're running a little on time and you want to make sure that your students are getting a deeper understanding of content. That's a great way to do it. But you could also go to something lengthier and have students use all of this information they're deriving to write a letter to the editor or create a plan for an updated monument to the Lewis and Clark expedition that they think portrays Sacagawea accurately, and then having them create a historic marker that provides the context for that. There are a lot of directions you can go from here depending upon classroom need. So next is another example from U.S. history from 1865 to the present. On the left is an excerpt in a newspaper image from Saluda near Middlesex, or in Middlesex County rather, about an individual named Irene Morgan who got on a bus in Petersburg and was asked to give up her seat. She refused and was sent to jail. This happened years before Rosa Parks, right here in Virginia. And if you teach in Middlesex or teach in Petersburg or teach anywhere along this route, you have this built-in engagement because of the local history that can really hook students right away. I'll talk about Encyclopedia Virginia as a great resource here in just a little bit. And then next to that is a poem from poetryfoundation.org where you can sort poems and search poems by theme. So this was found by just looking up the theme bravery. And you get this really awesome poem written from the perspective of a granddaughter about her grandmother and what it means to move to the back of a bus. That's really thought-provoking and compelling, and can lead to a lot of other interesting writing ideas. Either just writing to explain why the texts are paired or to compare and contrast. But you can also have students really read the poem and examine the author's craft, which is a really important 8th grade reading or 7th grade reading practice. And then having students create a poem in the style of that poet. That's a really valuable reading skill and a very valuable writing skill. And I haven't forgotten about civics. Civics, I think, sometimes can be almost easier to create paired passage sets with because you can really just focus on themes. The content itself is sort of thematic. Big ideas like freedom or due process. There are a lot of things out there that you can grab that focus on that. I mentioned a couple short stories, or a short story there Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut. Any short stories dealing with commentary around what freedom really is can really drive some cool discussion in a civics class. But also, because of the protest nature of popular music sometimes, there are some amazing songs that can be paired with civics concepts to form a really nice paired passage set. If you're talking about the military draft or the war powers of the presidency, pairing that with Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival could be a really powerful chance for students to think critically about what those war powers really mean. And then songs obviously about civil rights, like A Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke, can be used in a similar way. So I've discussed a little bit the idea of sharing some resources with you. I want to make sure I do that. And the first one is particularly valuable if you're thinking about creating professional learning around writing and scoring writing and giving feedback on writing. If you teach English, you almost certainly already know about Understand Scoring, but Understand Scoring is a website provided by VDOE to give English teachers ostensibly, but any teacher, exemplars of what writing looks like at individual score points using DOE rubrics. And for years, that was driven only by writing testing. But because of changes made to the local high school verified credit plan for writing, we have lots of different modes of writing available and Understand Scoring that you can print off and use with teachers to practice scoring, to look at writing samples and say, this is a 1 and here's why, this is a 2 and here's why. Understand Scoring gives you practice with that and gives you resources to do that sort of work with teachers. And I think oftentimes just talking together about what makes good writing and what makes good feedback can be very useful for supporting writing instruction in the classroom. So I mentioned already resources for building paired passages in Encyclopedia Virginia. Encyclopedia Virginia is a great place to go to find that sort of hidden local history. You see on the left, obviously, there are the big stories there. Loving Virginia is something that resonates not just locally or across the state, but across the nation. But I did a little cheating before we started here and found that we had a couple folks with us from Bath County today, one of my favorite places to visit, way out in Western Virginia. So I went to Encyclopedia Virginia, searched for Bath County in that search bar at the top, and found this really awesome piece about this person who I'd never heard of before, named Mary Johnston, who was a very powerful and important suffragist and social advocate who lived in Bath County. And had a fascinating life. And these passages can be adapted for your students. They're written on roughly a 6th grade level, but can be adapted and culled down and excerpted in a way that fits your needs for your class. Imagine being a student and all of a sudden seeing someone or reading about someone you had never heard of who's incredibly historically important and may have grown up just down the road from you. That can be a really powerful and engaging process and can really stimulate some awesome student work. So please check out encyclopediavirginia.org. Again, it's linked in this presentation, which you will receive a little bit later. Another great resource that is relatively new, but is really amazing, and I think particularly using any kind of current event, is bunkhistory.org. And this is provided by the New American History Project at the University of Richmond, which is the brainchild of Dr. Ed Ayers. And what this website includes is tons of current event material pulled from the news that is then linked to historical context and into big historical themes. So being able to pull down an article that Bunk History has identified as relating to westward expansion, but maybe a current event that's resonating in the news right now, can be a great place to start when you're thinking about building paired passages. Monk history is now and will remain totally free. It's not going behind a paywall, so it's something that you can certainly count on to be available for use in your classrooms. And another, and this is something, again, provided by a university, this by Harvard, but is now and is going to remain free, is commonlit.org. They have text sets that are already built. So if you are running low on time or want to sort of see what effective text sets may look like, CommonLit has those with nonfiction, fiction, poetry, lots of different resources for you. But you can, again, it's important to note that you can sort by theme, by grade level, and build some really cool work out of the resources that CommonLit has available. Thinking specifically about finding primary sources, and I know that for history teachers you have lots of different go-to spots for your primary sources, or you might already have a set that you're particularly pleased with, but if you're looking for more or looking for things that are tied specifically to Virginia history, or maybe you're looking for documents that, you know, eventually you can take a field trip and go see in person, the Library of Virginia, which is a state agency, provides the Document Bank of Virginia website. This is especially useful for U.S. history resources sorted by era. There are lots of political cartoons and maps and really interesting source material that is also typed up. So you don't have to just, look at a handwritten document from the 1600s and try to figure out exactly what it says. There are translations for you here at Document Bank of Virginia. And then one more, because I feel like we don't often have chances to highlight resources that are specific to Appalachia. Ferrum University sponsors the Digital Library of Appalachia in partnership with several other university museums. And this is an amazing place to go to for images and for music and interviews related to Appalachia. But because so much of that work is and so much of that art is embedded in the Depression era and during the war eras, it's something that can be really easy to bring into your history classroom as well. Again, even just looking at pictures from early Appalachia can be a really great stimulus for a larger writing or reading assignment. So I would encourage you to check out the Digital Library of Appalachia. And that is it for today, but certainly don't think this means our discussion has to be over. We love taking questions about this sort of work. I'd be happy to share more resources or speak with you one-on-one over the phone. If you'd like, you can just shoot me an email and we can arrange a time to chat. But you see there the contact information for our English office. And then also there on the right side, the rest of our history office. We work just a few feet from one another and love collaborating and working together on this sort of work. So please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions you may have for us. As again, this is the kind of thing we like talking about. We really enjoy working on with teachers. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you again for taking your afternoon to learn some new information with us. As I stated earlier, we will be posting this webinar for division level use or department grade level use, however it would best suit your needs. That will be posted soon. And please know that on Thursday, both at 9 and 2, we will explore scoring local performance assessments for verified credit in writing. And next week, we will be looking at co-teaching in the collaborative English classroom setting. So if you are interested in either of those, please check those out. The following weeks, we have several others lined up. So if you just want to take a look at our registration page, we'd be happy to have you join us for a future webinar. But thank you again for taking your time with us this afternoon. We hope you learned something, and we look forward to serving you again in the future. Thank you.